Imagine the coldest winter night of your life. The temperature drops so low that your breath instantly turns into icy vapor. The wind howls so loudly that it drowns out all other sounds around you. Now imagine that your only task is to stand on an open stone wall until dawn. Sounds like the plot of a horror movie, right? But for medieval guards, it was just a typical Tuesday evening. Today we complain if the air conditioning breaks down in the office or the heating is turned off. Our greatest discomfort is running from a warm car to a warm doorway. We have completely forgotten what it's like to survive alone in the wild. Medieval Europe did not forgive weakness, especially when winter came. Castle walls turned into real ice traps for those who guarded them. But here's where it gets interesting. If you watch any modern movie about knights, you will see brave guys clad in shiny steel. They stand proudly on snow-covered walls in their heavy cuirasses, their metal glistening in the light of torches. It looks incredibly epic, but from the point of view of historical reality, it is absolute pure absurdity. In winter, real guards en masse refuse to wear iron cuirasses, plate armor, and even ordinary chainmail. Metal in severe frost is not armor. It is a deadly trap that will kill you faster than an enemy arrow. And garrison commanders knew this simple rule of thermodynamics better than any Hollywood director. The problem lies in the phenomenal thermal conductivity of iron and steel, from which medieval armor was made. Metal instantly freezes in the frosty wind, reaching the ambient temperature in a matter of minutes. After that, it begins to act like a giant radiator in reverse, mercilessly drawing precious heat from the human body. Even if warm clothes are worn under the chainmail, the icy metal still penetrates to the bone with its cold. Standing in iron armor in the cold is like wrapping yourself in chunks of ice and hoping to warm up. No sane warrior would voluntarily put on such a refrigerator. Instead of useless and dangerous iron armor, guards switched to gambesons, thick, multi-layered quilted jackets. These garments were sewn from dozens of layers of thick linen fabric, which were carefully stitched together with strong thread. These unique pockets were tightly stuffed with horsehair, sheep's wool, dry tow, or even old rags. The result was a jacket several centimeters thick, which stood stiffly and weighed several kilograms. It sounds funny, but this fabric armor protected against cutting blows no worse than cheap chainmail. At the same time, it worked like a great down jacket, keeping all the heat inside. The Gambeson was a true marvel of medieval military engineering, combining protection and comfort. The air trapped between the layers of fabric and inside the padding created an ideal insulating layer around the body. This concept is identical to how modern winter jackets for mountaineers or polar explorers work. A warrior in good quilted armor could stand in the cold for hours without feeling the biting wind. Moreover, when an arrow struck, the fibrous padding often wrapped around the tip, preventing it from penetrating deeply. So this was one of those rare cases where the warmest clothing was also the safest. Interestingly, gambesons were not only warmer, but also significantly cheaper to produce than metal armor. Clothing an entire garrison in quilted jackets cost the lord mere pennies compared to purchasing steel breastplates. This made it possible to maintain large guard units in winter without completely depleting the castle's treasury. Women in villages could sew such armor during long winter evenings from readily available agricultural materials. This was essentially the first mass government order for the production of army winter uniforms in history. Economics and survival always went hand in hand in the harsh medieval world. There were, of course, exceptions to this rule, especially among the very rich and noble knights. They could afford to wear cuirasses, but they wore them over incredibly thick and expensive warm garments. However, elite knights rarely stood night watch on the windswept fortress walls. This dirty and dangerous work was done by ordinary mercenaries or conscripts from among the local peasants. For them, comfort and warmth always came first, pushing knightly aesthetics far into the background. Their main enemy that night was not the enemy army, but the merciless sub-zero temperatures. The rejection of iron armor was only the first step towards creating the ideal climatic shield for the human body. Gambesons protected the torso, but the cold tried to penetrate through any open areas and seams in clothing. To completely block the frosty wind, The guards applied a principle that is loved by all tourists today. They used an ingenious system of layering and actively employed natural materials with unique properties. The way they combined these elements deserves a separate detailed account. Believe me, their ingenuity in this matter surpasses many modern technological solutions. The guard's main and most effective weapon against the piercing night wind was his everyday clothing. More precisely, an incredible amount of this clothing, worn in a strictly defined order to achieve maximum effect. At the very bottom, next to the body, they always wore long shirts made of natural linen, which absorbs sweat perfectly. This is a critically important point, because if a person sweats from walking, the moisture will quickly turn into an ice pack in the cold. Linen wicks moisture away from the skin, working exactly like modern synthetic thermal underwear for athletes. Ancient people did not know the chemical composition of fabrics, but they had an excellent understanding of their practical physical properties. Several layers of thick, coarsely woven sheep's wool were worn over the linen base. Wool has a truly unique natural property. It continues to warm even when completely wet. Air is trapped between the twisted wool fibers, creating a reliable thermal barrier around the human body. The more thin layers are worn on top of each other, the more air pockets are formed between them. Modern extreme tourists call this the cabbage rule and strictly adhere to it in the mountains. Medieval guards practiced this rule many centuries before the advent of fashionable outdoor clothing brands. The use of fur in the Middle Ages was strictly regulated not only by the laws of survival, but also by economics. Simple mercenaries could not afford the luxurious sable, ermine, or fox worn by the wealthy aristocracy. Their lot was the skin of an ordinary domestic sheep, dog, or, if they were lucky, the coarse wolf fur from the nearest forest. But the paradox is that it was these coarse and cheap furs that often kept them much warmer than the elite skins. They had a denser undercoat, which was ideal for extreme static loads in the cold. So in this case, poverty paradoxically provided soldiers with better protection from the weather. This whole multi-layered construction of linen, wool, fur, and leather weighed an incredible amount. Soldiers carried an extra 10 kilograms of pure insulation, not counting weapons and armor. This made their movements sluggish and long walks along the wall an exhausting physical endurance training. My shoulders start to ache just from trying to imagine the weight of a wet, grease-soaked wool cloak. But this weight was the price to pay for the ability to keep warm until the morning shift arrived. In the cruel world of the Middle Ages, comfort never came for free. You always had to pay for it later. To prevent the cold wind from penetrating their clothing from below or through their sleeves, the guards used a system of straps and wraps. They tightly fastened their cloaks with leather belts at the waist, creating an airtight cocoon around their torsos. The sleeves of gambesons and shirts were tightly fastened at the wrists, and the legs were wrapped in long strips of fabric over the trousers. These wraps not only kept the shins warm, but also supported the muscles during long, tiring walks on stone. Today, athletes use expensive elastane compression leggings for the same purpose. Medieval warriors solved the same biomechanical problem with pieces of old sheep's wool.
Cold morn. That ale will taste fine.
If you ask any ordinary person how to warm up quickly in the cold, half of them will confidently say alcohol. This dangerous myth is firmly rooted in the popular consciousness and has cost thousands of lives throughout history. In the Middle Ages, hot ale or mulled wine with spices was indeed an incredibly popular remedy for the cold. A mug of steaming spiced drink before going out into the wind seemed like a real godsend for a frozen sentry. And this drink did indeed provide an instant, almost magical warming effect that could be felt throughout the body. But behind this pleasant illusion lay an insidious physiological trap that experienced commanders were aware of. The secret of this rapid effect lies in how ethyl alcohol affects the human circulatory system. Alcohol is a powerful vasodilator, causing the capillaries under the skin to instantly expand to their maximum. Hot blood from the internal organs rushes to the periphery, creating a rapid sensation of warmth in the face and hands. The guard on the wall really began to feel incredibly hot and comfortable in his icy cloak. Sounds like the perfect solution to the problem, doesn't it? But modern biology explains why this process is actually fatal for a freezing person. Nevertheless, it was physically and psychologically impossible to completely eliminate alcohol from the guards' diet. In those days, clean drinking water was rare and often served as a source of deadly intestinal infections. Weak ale and diluted wine were the standard, everyday drinks for all classes of the population, from peasants to kings. The process of fermentation and boiling killed dangerous bacteria, making these drinks the safest source of fluids. In essence, it was a kind of medieval sports drink that provided soldiers with basic hydration and carbohydrates. The main thing was to maintain a fine line between necessary thirst quenching and dangerous intoxication while on duty. To minimize harm and maximize benefits, drinks for the guard were often prepared according to special warming recipes. Honey, black pepper, cloves, and other available hot spices were generously added to wine or ale. This peculiar mulled wine burned the throat and stimulated blood circulation on its own, without the need to get drunk. Honey provided a powerful boost of fast carbohydrates, which burned instantly, giving the body energy to generate internal heat. This is similar to how modern mountaineers drink hot sweet tea with ginger at high altitudes. The ancient recipe was harsher in taste, but it did its job perfectly. Captains also used alcohol as a powerful psychological motivator for their exhausted soldiers. The promise of hot spiced wine at the end of their shift kept the sentry enduring the cold and not giving up. This mug served as a beacon of hope in the bleak darkness of the icy night, a reward for their steadfastness. The soldiers knew that if they honestly served their 2 hours in the wind, warmth and a coveted drink awaited them below. It is a primitive but incredibly effective method of managing people's behavior in a state of extreme stress. Psychologists call it positive reinforcement, and commanders of the past simply called it good service. A direct frosty wind is the worst enemy of anyone trying to survive outdoors in winter. A temperature of -10 degrees can feel like -30 if you are standing in a piercing draft. At the height of the fortress walls, where there were no trees or other buildings, the gusts of wind reached hurricane force. To prevent the guards from being literally blown off the wall by the icy storm, the architects resorted to special tricks. Small protective structures were often built at the corners of the towers and along the endless long walls. These were primitive but incredibly effective shelters from the wrath of winter nature. The simplest and most common solution was stone niches, integrated directly into the masonry of the fortress wall. They were small recesses just large enough for one person, usually facing away from the prevailing winds. In these tiny stone pockets, soldiers could hide from the direct blast of icy air. The niche did not protect them from the cold itself, as the stone remained icy, but it did eliminate the cooling effect of the wind. This gave them a chance to catch their breath, adjust their hoods, and give their faces a moment's respite from the stinging snow. Even such a primitive shelter increased their chances of survival several times over. Modern bus stop designers use exactly the same principle of passive protection from the weather. They install glass or plastic walls to shield people from the wind while maintaining a good view of the road. Medieval engineers solved this urban problem centuries ago using rough stone and thick wood. The only difference is that waiting for a bus is rarely a matter of life and death these days. For a guard on the wall, such a booth was the only lifeline in the midst of a raging ocean of cold. It is a perfect example of how architecture serves not only beauty, but also basic human needs. Naturally, these shelters also posed a certain danger to the discipline and security of the castle. As we have already discovered, standing still means freezing, and standing in a warm, cozy niche means risking falling asleep. Therefore, captains strictly forbade soldiers from staying in these booths for more than a few minutes at a time. The shelters were intended for short breaks during patrols, not for comfortable pastimes throughout the entire shift. If an inspector found a sentry peacefully sleeping in a niche, the punishment was swift, cruel, and often public. Comfort always had to be balanced with the paranoid vigilance of wartime. When spring finally arrived and the snow melted, many wooden booths were dismantled until the following winter to free up space. It was seasonal architecture, like summer verandas in modern cafes, only with the opposite sign. The stone niches remained forever, turning into convenient places to store arrows or spare weapons in the summer. They still stand there, empty and cold, like silent witnesses to thousands of frozen nights of past centuries. And if you ever take a tour of an old castle, be sure to look into one of these recesses in the wall. You will feel history literally breathing on you from these cramped stone pockets. But even in a niche protected from the wind, a soldier could not tear his feet away from the frozen stone floor. The cold continued to relentlessly attack the most vulnerable point, the feet, where blood circulation slows down the fastest. Ordinary leather boots were completely powerless against this icy contact, and a non-standard solution was required. Medieval people found the answer literally under their feet, using the simplest materials in the most ingenious way. The way they saved their feet from gangrene is striking in its simplicity and incredible physical effectiveness. And this will be the subject of our next equally intriguing chapter. Our modern winter hiking boots are equipped with multi-layered soles made of foam, rubber, and high-tech insulation. We take it for granted that we can stand on ice for hours and our feet remain relatively dry and warm. But the ordinary leather boots of the Middle Ages provided no warmth at all on icy stone, becoming true conductors of cold. The thin leather sole provided no insulation, and the cold from the stone was instantly transferred to the feet. If left as is, after an hour of standing on the wall, the guard would simply lose his toes to frostbite. Therefore, the issue of insulating footwear was as acute as the issue of protecting the chest from enemy arrows. To save their feet from inevitable gangrene and amputation, the guards resorted to an incredibly simple but ingenious trick. They stuffed their winter shoes tightly with dry straw, hay, or even specially collected forest moss. This organic material created an excellent air layer between the icy leather of the boot and the warm feet of the wearer. The air in the hollow straw stalks acted as an excellent insulator, trapping body heat inside the footwear. In essence, they created a miniature thermos inside the boot using free waste from the stables. And this primitive technology worked so well that it saved millions of feet throughout medieval Europe. But straw alone was often not enough if there were deep puddles of icy water or wet snow on the battlefields. Leather boots quickly became soaked through, and then no amount of straw could save a person from hypothermia. Therefore, guards often wore so-called pattens, special protective devices, over their soft leather shoes. These were thick wooden shoes or platforms with high soles that were attached to the foot with leather straps. They raised the foot a few centimeters above the icy puddles, mud, and frozen stone floor of the fortress. It sounds uncomfortable, but it was a reliable barrier between warm feet and deadly cold stone. Experienced soldiers had their own secret recipes for mixing various herbs and straw for better insulation. Some added dried mint or wormwood to their shoes to repel insects and mask the heavy smell of sweat. Others used dog hair combed from castle dogs to create incredibly warm felt balls inside their boots. This knowledge was passed down from old veterans to young recruits during long gatherings around the fire. It was a kind of soldier's alchemy, where instead of the philosopher's stone, they sought a way to save their toes. And judging by the fact that these people won many years of war, their alchemy worked flawlessly. Today you can buy heated thermal socks with a built-in battery and control them from your smartphone. You can adjust the temperature of your feet while waiting for a taxi after a fashionable party in the city center. And in the 14th century, a guy stuffed a bunch of dry hay into a holy boot and went to war with the elements for 9 hours. And the most amazing thing is that, from the point of view of heat conservation physics, these two methods are conceptually identical. The only difference is in the technological implementation and the price that people paid for their mistake. We are lucky to live in the age of batteries, not in the age of straw and frostbitten limbs. Saving their feet was an important step, but castle engineers thought on a much larger scale than ordinary soldiers. They wanted to protect not just individual parts of the guard's body, but the entire battlements of the wall. If you can't defeat winter, then you need to build a wooden roof and walls around it. This is how one of the most impressive and underrated fortifications of the Middle Ages was born. This structure transformed the castle's open, cold roof into a closed defensive corridor, and this wooden innovation changed the rules of winter warfare beyond recognition. When we imagine a classic medieval castle, we usually see crenellated stone walls, open to the winds. This image is firmly entrenched in our minds thanks to countless historical films and tourist brochures. But in reality, especially in regions with harsh, snowy winters, fortresses look completely different. During the cold season, hoardings, massive covered wooden galleries, were often erected on top of the stone battlements. They seemed to hang over the abyss, turning an open and dangerous battlefield into a closed and safe corridor. This was true medieval high-tech, which changed the very concept of defense and survival for the garrison. Imagine that a long wooden shed with small windows was suddenly built on the roof of your stone house. The hoardings were built of thick wooden beams and planks, which were attached to the stone walls with special struts. They had a sturdy gabled roof that protected the sentries from direct snowfall and heavy autumn rain. Narrow loopholes were cut into them from the street side for shooting arrows and observing the approaches to the castle. Hatches were often made in the floor of these galleries through which stones could be thrown or boiling water poured on attacking enemies. It was an ideal firing point, combined with shelter from the most severe vagaries of nature. Inside these enclosed wooden corridors, it was often completely dark, as it was too dangerous to use torches. Wood could instantly burst into flames from an accidental spark, turning the life-saving gallery into a giant funeral pyre for the guards. Therefore, soldiers had to move in complete darkness, relying only on the dim light of the moon shining through the loopholes. They knew their section of the wall by heart, every joint between the boards, every step, and every turn of the gallery. Their hearing was sharpened to the limit, picking up any suspicious sounds both inside the castle and beyond its walls. This turned them into true nocturnal predators, perfectly adapted to their dark and dangerous environment. For the enemy army, these covered galleries were a real tactical nightmare during the winter siege. They could not see how many soldiers were on the wall and where exactly they were concentrated at any given moment. The guards could move safely and secretly inside the hoardings, quickly pulling their forces to the site of a possible breakthrough. The attackers' arrows bounced helplessly off the thick oak planks, while the defenders fired accurately from the loopholes. A winter assault on such a well-prepared castle was considered a virtually impossible task and pure suicide for the attackers. Therefore, wars often came to a standstill in winter, turning into a war of attrition and survival for both sides of the conflict. Over time, some wealthy castles began to build these galleries out of stone, making them permanent architectural features. They were called machicolations and forever changed the classic silhouette of fortress towers, adding characteristic stone canopies. Stone did not burn or rot, but it was significantly colder than wood, so the winter comfort of the guards was slightly reduced. However, from a global defense perspective, stone machicolations were an incredible step forward in military engineering. By studying the history of the medieval guard, we are actually studying the fundamental limits of the human body's capabilities. We see how people, deprived of all the benefits of modern civilization, found ingenious solutions to the most complex problems of survival. They did not fight nature head-on because they knew that nature cannot be defeated, only negotiated with. They used the laws of physics, physiology, and psychology centuries before these sciences were formally formulated by academics. Their laboratory was a frozen fortress wall, and the price of a failed experiment was their own lives and the lives of their comrades.